Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Soaring gas prices help drive up food costs, hitting Californians hard as their money buys less.
If you put the same energy and imagination that you put into Facebook, into the political process, I guarantee you there's nothing we can't solve.
President Obama faces supporters and protesters on his whirlwind re-election campaign fundraising trip through the Bay Area. Disturbing video submitted as key evidence in the Chauncey Bailey murder trial shows the leader of Your Black Muslim Bakery laughing about the Oakland journalist's death. And plans for a $1.5 billion makeover of Treasure Island provokes controversy. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight on our news panel are John King, urban design critic for the San Francisco Chronicle; Bob Butler, reporter for KCBS Radio and the Chauncey Bailey Project; Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle senior political writer; and Tom Vacar, consumer editor for KTVU News. Tom, we've watched as gas prices have gone up more than 30% from last year. What justification could there be for that?
Well, if you're talking about is there a problem with supply and demand, too much demand for not enough supply? No, there's plenty of oil out there. Pretty clear at this point in time that oil speculators, that's different than oil companies, oil speculators have bid up the price, kept bidding it up, kept bidding it up, kept bidding it up. And the fact of the matter is that nobody's throwing more supply into this to weigh against it. So as a result, the price keeps climbing. That's basically what's going on here. It is not an issue of not enough fuel that's for demand. In fact, the demand for fuel has been fairly flat and only rising slightly.
Is that why President Obama is asking for an investigation as to whether the market's being manipulated?
Well, you know, there have been many, many investigations, dozens over the years, on the oil companies to see if there's some sort of collusion or something going on. Not one time has that ever resulted in any actual finding of that. This is different. This isn't the oil companies. This is the oil markets. This is the futures markets. These are the speculators. And a lot of these people say, man, you know, if I could get an extra 10 or 15 cents, you know, for 12 million barrels of oil, that's a lot of money in the end game. And that's really what's going on here. Having said that, there are some other reasons that things are more expensive. I mean, obviously the environmental rules in the wake of BP are certainly contributing to a certain amount of that increase, and certainly here in California, because we have California carb gas, we pay higher prices than anybody else in the country. But if anybody's looking at a pure supply and demand situation, you really have to look to the futures markets rather than to who's using gas and who isn't.
So Tom, I paid $4.55 right before the show. That's the highest I've ever paid. How high? There was some suggestion today that this could go to $6 a gallon by the end of the year. How high is it going to get? Well,
the all-time Bay Area high was in June of 2008, and it was $4.60 a gallon, so we're not quite there yet. Now, one person who has speculated that if we have a couple of well-placed hurricanes in the Gulf, we could get to $6 a gallon. Highly unlikely, but it is a possibility. Will we get to $5 a gallon by the summertime? Highly likely. So this will probably be a record-setting year, because remember, the summer driving season has really not even begun yet.
Well, let's flip the question around, though. What if, miraculously, peace descends on the Middle East and Gaddafi heads out of town, Syria quiets down, there aren't more revolutions? Could this speculative bubble burst?
It could indeed, but the point would be that a lot of things would have to happen all at one time. The problem is we're kind of running out of time, because what we're running out of is the time before the summer driving season ramps up, and once that really ramps up, you have a problem. Now, the other thing that can mitigate against this, and a lot of people, you know, are starting to make some noise about this, this could bring about a kind of a dip in the recovery. There is a very real possibility with the increase in fuel prices that we could see other things happening, and we're starting to see that. Today, McDonald's says that they believe a year from now, or within the end of this year, that food prices are going to be 4.5% higher. Now, if you never walked into the Golden Arches, it doesn't matter except for one thing. McDonald's is a real leading indicator of where food prices are going, and what McDonald's does very often happens in the grocery stores and stuff like that. And I was talking to a produce wholesaler today who told me he's never seen any price increases like this ever, because A, we had 6 months of lousy weather that impacted most growing areas across the country and in Mexico. Now that's followed by these fuel spikes. He says that his trucks now cost him 75 cents a mile, considering the depreciation, the insurance, and the fuel. 75 cents a mile to drive. Now, I'm telling you something. You drive 50 miles, you're adding price to the price of produce, and it's spiking something like 30–40% higher than a year ago.
So if we go through all this, and let's say all these indicators do happen, and we have peace in the Middle East, we have all these other things happen, how low is the price going to go back down to?
Well, I mean, you know, as silly as this may sound, it really is a function of what happens in China and India more than anything else now, because these are the growing economies that are using a lot of fuel. We will never see 99 cents a gallon gasoline again, but it's possible we could get down to $2. But a lot of good things would have to happen. The likelihood of that is almost zero.
How about $3? I mean, $3 a gallon sounds awfully good right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could happen, but again, a lot of good things have to happen, and there's nothing on the horizon to suggest any of those good things are going to happen, because even if you have a settlement of the issues in Libya, you still have a very much of a powder keg in the entire Middle East, and that is oil territory.
Okay, so Belva's mention of President Obama's investigation. I mean, what could this possibly turn up, and could that affect this in any way, or is this just a political move to kind of mitigate what's going on?
I think you're going to find more real competition between the oil companies than most people would like to admit to. But I think in the speculative markets, which is a whole different industry, that's just, you know, I'm betting that this is going to become more expensive, and somebody's saying, well, maybe if it gets a little more expensive, I'll buy it. That keeps upping the price. That's where the real problem is with this. The trouble with that is it contributes to every other product and service that we deal with. So as a result, if grocery prices go up, then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the farmer going to get? Because if the farmer's paying more for tractor fuel and all that stuff, this is an inflationary spiral that's starting. And if we don't get this under arrest pretty soon, we could really see a significant problem for the economy in the not too distant future.
So, Tom, this is a worldwide problem. It's one that the president of this country is trying to tackle with an investigation. But it's also could be the linchpin as to whether he's successful in keeping the recession under control.
Keeping his job.
Yeah, and this really has almost nothing to do with him. I mean, the reality of the situation is you have a worldwide food market now. Now, certain things are confined to certain countries, but I mean, when you really think about wheat and rice and all these basic commodities, and remember, there are speculators in that. And as they see these prices going up, and as they see these costs that are endemic in those prices going up, they start bidding up the price. So this is one of those things where if the brakes don't get put on and soon, we could see a spiral that would be very uncomfortable. On the other hand, there is a point in time when people say, you know what? I'm not going on that summer vacation. You know what? I'm not going to go buy this thing. You know what? I'm not going to do that. And that starts an economic contraction.
I'm not going to exercise at McDonald's.
So we moved to Carla Marinucci, who is covering the president, who was here.
That's right.
Who's hoping, really hoping that something happens, that the economy will grow.
Absolutely, Belva. At just about every event this week, whether it was the fundraisers or the big rally at the Masonic Auditorium or Facebook, the president referenced gas prices. He acknowledged the disappointment and the frustration of consumers. He knows very well if these prices are high in November 2012, his chances of getting elected drop considerably. So this was absolutely a theme. His visit into the Bay Area is less than 24 hours. He picked up millions of dollars, but we also saw a lot of frustration from, as your video showed, protesters even in the events at the St. Regis Hotel, where one group of protesters from a group called FreshJuiceParty.com paid $76,000 to sit at a table and sing to him. I mean, this...
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Explain that. Why would they pay $76,000 to sing to him?
Because it was a fundraiser in which you had to pay at least $5,000 to get a seat at the St. Regis, up to $35,000. And they paid the freight for an entire
I was going to say, I mean...
So they interrupted his speeches.
To say what?
They were protesting the treatment of Private Bradley Manning in the WikiLeaks case, but they also had a litany of other concerns about Obama, which we saw around the Bay Area as he traveled around, whether it was health care, what happened to single payer, gay marriage, people called out those kind of things, at the Nob Hill event. Obama had to deal with this. This trip was about picking up money for his re-election campaign, which is going to be very expensive, and he probably picked up about $4 million in the Bay Area. But at the same time, at every event, the Facebook event, acknowledged the disappointment, saying, "Hey, I know I've got gray hair, and I'm not the guy I know you got the poster of me, and you're saying what happened to that guy." He has to sort of make his base happy as well.
Let me ask you this. Are a lot of people disappointed, as I've heard some people comment, that he comes to the Bay Area, comes to California, and this is a state that's been very friendly to him and very supportive of him, and yet he makes very few public appearances where, if you're willing to pay, you get to see the president. If you're not willing to pay, too bad. I mean, does that work against him with the voters?
You have a point, because the last time he came, it was that billionaires dinner down in Silicon Valley, which a lot of people think didn't do him any favors. This time it was at Facebook, was his public event, but that really wasn't public. He's sitting next to one of the richest guys on the planet, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO. 40,000 people signed on. It was an event where people were invited to give questions, but there were only 8 questions in the entire hour, and most of them, I have to say, were softball questions. I was expecting a cutting-edge group like Facebook would be really sort of plowing new ground and asking him different questions. He didn't get any really courageous questions at Facebook.
They weren't selected. I mean, there were plenty of questions. I'm sure there were plenty of questions asked, but somebody had to select what they were going to ask.
Yeah, and I think that there is a disappointment in that. Yes, there are a lot of high-end fundraisers when it comes to the Bay Area, but there's not a lot of going out to public schools or some of the things.
Is that still part of a political campaign now? I mean, does anybody do that?
And I think he's going to have to do it, Belva, because, the Bay Area, yes, is a solidly blue area. He really doesn't have to worry yet, but the fact is, the progressives are a little upset with him. Are they going to go someplace else? Look, they admit as soon as the Republicans put up somebody, they're probably going to be in Obama's camp. But the fact is, you've got to fire up those young people to get out there like they were in 2008. He reminded people at the Masonic Auditorium, remember Grant Park on election night, what that was like, how you were all out there for me. And he has to sort of give them a reason to believe still. And I think he did that to some extent. But it
didn't cost $35,000 to go to Grant Park, though.
No, it did not. I was there. You saw that night, 350,000 people, many of them young people. And I think that was the Facebook crowd that he was trying to reach. The White House said that was an event designed to reach people who don't use traditional news media. And you did have a crowd of people. The president said he's got 19 million friends on Facebook. That's not as much as SpongeBob SquarePants, but it's okay.
So he's got lots of mountains to climb.
He does.
The economy now, food prices, gas prices.
Yes, and a lot was going to depend where
up.
those prices are when the election comes around.
How tough is it, just real quick, in today's media climate to cut through all the negativity? I mean, if I'm the White House having to say, look at this unemployment, da-da-da-da-da, and we're saying
he says
gas
exactly
prices
that,
and you weren't public enough.
Which is, hey, you haven't heard, I've actually cut a lot of your taxes. You keep hearing I'm raising taxes. He has to sort of argue against the hot talk radio and the Limbaugh crowd. But the fact is, now it has begun. The steamroller has started on the re-election campaign, and that's what we saw in the Bay Area this weekend.
So how much of people's dissatisfaction is a result of the way he's being portrayed in, they call it the right-wing media, conservative media, whatever. How much of it is because of that, and how much of it is because he has not delivered on what he promised?
Well, I think some of it is exactly what we're talking about when you're talking about the jobless rate, when you're talking about people seeing the $5 gas prices. These are things he has to worry about in terms of quality of life issues for average Americans.
Well, Bob, you were covering a trial where there were real revelations where if you're the prosecution, the case moved forward. What happened at the Chauncey Bailey trial this week?
Well, this week there was some critical evidence that the juries got to see. One was the video that you played in the opening that shows the head of the former Your Black Muslim Bakery basically mocking what happened to Chauncey Bailey when he was shot by saying pow, pow, poof and throwing his head back. Of course, Chauncey was shot 3 times, the last time in the head. You also had an expert for the company that makes these GPS tracking devices basically explaining that, yes, we followed the tracking device on his car, and Yusuf Bey IV and Devondre Broussard and Antoine Mackey, these are the 3 guys accused in Bailey's death, were sitting outside Chauncey's apartment 7 hours before he was shot. Of course, Broussard now has admitted killing Chauncey and one other guy, and he's testifying against the Bey IV and Mackey. And the defense is saying that he's nothing but a liar, he's making it all up, but the GPS tracking device proves what he was saying. He said we were sitting outside Chauncey's apartment. He was trying to get Mackey or me to go up there and shoot Chauncey. And everybody else is saying, well, that didn't happen, but they clearly were there.
This video is so dramatic, and yet it took the Chauncey Bailey Project to actually put it out there in front of the public and air it. Why did it take you guys to do that instead of the police or law enforcement?
Well, one of the things that we've learned in the whole investigation is that the police department in Oakland has been very dysfunctional. And this video was actually taken in a separate case, in the kidnapping case that they were arrested for. When they raided the bakery on August 3rd, it wasn't because of Chauncey's murder. It was because of the kidnapping that took place on May 17th. So you had an investigator who didn't have enough evidence to hold these guys on the kidnapping. They said, well, let's put them in a room and start recording and see what they say. And of course, as soon as the police leave the room, the first thing out of one of the suspects' mouths is, let's get our story straight on the kidnapping. So they had this tape, and the investigator said he gave it to homicide. Homicide says, well, I think we got it. We don't know. We never looked at it. And that's what happened.
Well, we have to background a little bit in case people have not followed this. This was a murder that happened some 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3.5 years ago.
And it was killed was Chauncey Bailey, who worked for the Oakland Post newspaper. And he was on an investigative trail to prove what about them?
Well, one of the things Chauncey was working on was a piece about the financial problems at Your Black Muslim Bakery, a once prominent institution that started back in the early 70s. And a lot of problems came about after the founder, Dr. Yusuf Bey, died in 2003. The first thing that happened is that his son, Antar, took over the bakery. And the first thing, they got rid of a lot of the people that had run the business in the past. The first mistake they made was not paying taxes. You can do a lot of things wrong in a business, but you've got to pay your taxes. That was the first thing. So about a year after Antar took over, they took out a loan for $650,000, and they quit paying back the loan. So that led to all these financial problems. Of course, in the interim, Antar gets killed in a carjacking, and then that happened, and then the bakery goes into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So Chauncey was writing a story about the takeover of the bakery by the younger guys and the financial problems. And what we have from witnesses is that Bey IV did not, he was the leader of the bakery, Yusuf Bey IV, the founder's son, did not want that story coming out because they said he feared it would hurt his chances of staving off Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
Can I ask you one thing? You made a point, and we were talking about this earlier. You talked about the difference between the coverage of this trial and the Barry Bonds thing, and I think that's fascinating.
Well, it is a big difference. I mean, both trials started March 21st. The first day of the Bailey trial, I think we probably had, we had like 4 or 5 TV stations. We had most of the reporters in the Bay Area were there. The Bonds trial had 50 reporters. The LA Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, I believe, AP, everybody was there, 3 sketch artists. At the Bailey trial, there was 1 sketch artist.
And yet this was the first killing of an American journalist
since 1976. For a person, American journalist killed in the United States for doing his or her job. Yeah. So we started off with about 10 reporters. Yesterday in court, there were 2 reporters in the morning and 3 in the afternoon.
And the project was organized by media.
Yes,
outlets.
well, the reporters said, wait a minute, like what happened, the first time this happened was 76. Don Bowles, a reporter for the Arizona Republic, investigating organized crime. He gets a tip that this guy has information. He shows up, the guy doesn't show up. He goes back and gets in his car, the car blows up, he dies a couple of days later. That's right around the time investigative reporters and editors was created. And they actually came together, came to Arizona to finish his work. So we did the same thing.
So what's next? How far along are you in the process?
Well,
now?
the prosecution says they have about 20 more witnesses. Then it's the defense's turn. But some of the witnesses to come include the investigator that the Chauncey Bailey project wrote about, Sergeant Derwin Longmire. And basically, our reporting made him look really bad because the investigation was very incomplete and very shoddy. But the prosecution wants to put him on the stand so he can explain all the things we brought up in our stories.
Well, we've talked about a lot of troubles tonight, John. I'm just going to turn to you right now. And I was going to say, so now we get to talk about dreaming because John is here to talk about.
It's quite a difference. There's the day-to-day reality of the world,
Yes.
and then the way cities take shape and regions take shape is, meanwhile, planners and architects and developers and financiers and politicians are imagining what comes next.
Right.
And you've got that in the oddest place, Treasure Island, which the Navy essentially in the early 90s said we're leaving. And ever since then, there's been talk about what do you do with it. Willie Brown at one point suggested a casino. Well, in 2005, the idea was, why don't we put a lot of housing there? So much housing that it'll subsidize a ferry, it'll subsidize grocery stores, muni buses, AC transit buses. It's like creating a city in the Bay, and it'll be the most eco-friendly big city neighborhood in the United States. And everyone who paid attention said, great idea, great idea. It wins a host of awards. It gets unanimous votes. Last year, the details went through the Board of Supervisors, a 10-zip vote, which was a very progressive board. Now we're at the point where it's actually voting to allow the project to happen, which is different from it happening, but we'll talk about that. And now you get the critics who realize this is the leverage point to say, why are you letting each apartment have a car or each condominium? You shouldn't have that many cars. It'll just shut down the Bay Bridge.
But some of the big picture questions here, I mean, nobody who saw those tsunami videos in Japan can look at Treasure Island and not say, how can you have 19,000 people there? Would they be in danger?
The crazy thing about Treasure Island, and I agree with you, I mean, that's also the reality check now. There's concern, forget about the tsunami, which didn't help the spin of the project, but the whole sea level rise issue. Or the earthquake issue. I mean, these they've been wrestling with for years. They've got huge engineering plans. The fact is that place is no more vulnerable than San Francisco's financial district, than great swaths of the inner East Bay and San Mateo County. The fact is, though, it's so exposed. I mean, no one's been on Treasure Island, but everyone's driven by it a million times. And so you look at it and you think, well, they can show me all the engineering studies, and they can explain why a tsunami couldn't be that powerful in the Bay, da-da-da-da-da. What if? And that's the interesting thing right now as it kicks in.
Tell us a little bit about how we got Treasure Island, and was it ever intended?
Well, it was an artificial island to begin with.
Yes.
But I mean, back then, the way you made an island, you just kind of dragged sand together from the bottom of the bay, and y'all dumped it in, and you mixed a few boulders in just for fun, and called it a day, and then you held a World's Fair. You know, it was going to be an airport initially, and then the Navy took it over in World War II as a base, and it became, my uncle was in the armed forces. It was kind of where, it was like the commissary for the Bay Area military.
You know what's interesting? I've done some stories out there, and I've been out there many, many times, and it really is a very big place, and it's a very fascinating place. What's really interesting to me about it is there are already 4 wineries out there, 4, and a 5th one is coming. And one of these wineries is very sophisticated. It's in one of the old China Clipper hangars, and they're making a go of it. And it seems to me that that could truly be, if well done and done safely, that could be one of the great tourist destinations in the world.
Well, the interesting thing is if you step away, you know, and my job is writing about urban design and architecture, so there's the part of me that's I'm going to go up in the clouds and dream the ideal. But if you step away from all the reality of politics and tsunamis and cars and housing prices, the potential there is genuinely remarkable. To create something, the idea is to pull all the development into 100 acres. You'd have townhouses, but you'd have 20-story towers, so on and so forth. And then most of the island would be just kind of wild land, you know, totally remake it. But the idea would also be essentially there would be a commercial area, the hangars would be kept, if you could have small business incubators, I mean, it's an interesting netherworld
But when
right
you talk
now.
about potential, what about the potential for traffic? I think of 19,000 people out there and having to drive the Bay Bridge every day. What are they going to do to the Bay Bridge?
Well, they're kids. They're older people. But see, part of the theory is if we pull everything in, we make the ferries real convenient. Maybe you'll own a car, but if you're working in downtown San Francisco, you'd rather take that cool 10-minute ferry ride, hop
betcha.
off at the ferry building. I mean, so that's the theory. The environmentalist, and this is the leverage point when you're heading to the Board of Supervisors, they say, yeah, but come on, if they got a car they're going to drive, they shouldn't be allowed to have a car.
We're down to just a few minutes, so you have to tell us
Sure.
architecturally what would it look like and what is it going to cost?
The overall cost is estimated at $1.5 billion, although the estimated completion date, if they stayed on schedule, would be 2028. So we're not talking, this is a multi-phase thing. Architecturally, it would be kind of like cool little modern buildings. I mean, the trick is a lot of what gets built new tends to be these chunky stucco boxes, and we all look at them and say, that's not anything I love. The idea is to really thread the environment and the architecture together to create a much greener sort of neighborhood so that it would be, you don't want to get in your car, you want to walk outside, and you've got your cool little building with a cool little balcony.
So at least we end on a dream tonight.
We end on a dream. All this sordid reality of the last 25 minutes, we'll end on the dream.
And we didn't even ask you how much it was going to cost to be there, so keep that as a secret. We don't want to end on a bad note. Well, my thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight.
Thanks for having us.
We're always available online at kqed.org/thisweek for past episodes and segments, to sign up for our newsletter and our podcast, and to share your thoughts about the program. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.